Well, good morning. So I want to start off. You guys know I like to start with questions. So I have a big question for this morning, and the question is this. What are you thinking about right this very moment? What are you thinking about right this very moment? Now, it might be something that's kind of like in the back of your mind, and it's just kind of sitting there while you're trying to pay attention, but that thing's there. Or maybe it's so big and whatever that it's annoying you and it's just consuming you, having a hard time paying attention. But what are you thinking about right now? And how is it affecting your attitude? Because I promise you that it is. Maybe in a good way, maybe in a bad way. But whatever it is, whatever that thing is that you're thinking about, it's affecting you in more ways than you might think. Well, as you think about that, let me take a moment and see if I can distract you by telling you a personal story. This is something that happened to me, 6-8 weeks ago, probably at least now. I'd had a great day here at work. I was on my way home. I was looking forward to going home, having dinner with Lynette, relaxing, and then watching some of our favorite TV shows that evening. I was about halfway home. I'm driving down the road. I'm approaching this turn in front of me, this curve that kind of curves to the right. And as I approach it, I notice another truck coming out of that same curve toward me, a big box truck pulling a landscape trailer. And as I get closer to him and he gets closer to me, he begins to drift over the double yellow lines in front of me. And at that moment, I went, uh-oh, this is going to be trouble. In fact, what I thought, and I don't know why this thought came to my mind, but the first thing that came to my mind was, you're going to have to thread this needle. And so I pull to the right as far as I can, trying to miss the ditch as this guy just keeps coming over. And the good news is I missed the ditch, and for the most part, missed being hit by him. The only thing that actually hit was our side mirrors, the one on my door versus the one on his door. Now, we were both traveling probably about 30, 35 miles an hour apiece, and I don't know if you've ever had that happen, but when our mirrors hit, it sounded like a shotgun went off on the inside of my truck. And my first thoughts was, oh my gosh, he just ripped the whole side of my truck off. And so I got to the top of the hill, realized that all he had done was the mirror, turned around, came back. He'd pulled over the side of the road, called the police because I knew that I wasn't at fault, and I wanted to make sure that, insurance paid for my truck because nothing is cheap nowadays to get fixed. So the police show up. They ask me what happened. I tell them. They go over, talk to that guy. The other guy comes back and he says, we're not going to charge either one of you with the accident because he's claiming that you crossed the line, just like you said that he crossed the line. And since nobody stopped for witnesses, now there were cars in front and behind him and in front and behind me, but nobody stopped. And he said, since there was no witnesses, then there's really nothing I can do. You'll just have to turn it over to your insurance. To which, at that point, my attitude went from really good to, well, let's just say not so good for a couple reasons. One, I hate dealing with insurance. And two, how dare this guy say that I was the one who crossed the line? So that's eating my lunch. Well, then to make a long story short, I start dealing with the insurance company who was absolutely no help whatsoever. And that's a whole nother story and conversation for another day. So I ended up having to track down a new mirror for my truck. And it ended up costing me $495. Now, I have a $500 deductible on my insurance. So, how's my attitude? You get the point, right? You know what was really bothering me, though, this whole time about the whole thing? Especially the longer this went on, and it lasted for several weeks. It was how much time I spent being mad, plotting, revenge. We all do that, right? I knew where this guy lived. I'd tracked it down. Anyway, we won't go there. And how much time I spent fretting just over the whole thing. I let this stupid broken mirror become such a distraction in my life. How many of you have ever experienced anything like that? I'm not the only one, right? We've all been there. We've all done that. We all have, and we've all let something that we have no control over control what we do have control over, and that is our attitude. We let something like that I mean, there's nothing I could do about it. It happened, but for weeks, it just, oh man, I was mad. But it was crazy how long I let that go on. Whatever it is that you're thinking about right now, and again, it doesn't have to be a bad story, it doesn't have to be a bad experience, it could be something good, but whatever it is right now, as hard as you're not trying maybe not to think about it, it's there. And it's, and every time you think you're done and you're over with it, what happens? Something triggers it and it comes back up in your mind, doesn't it? Well, here, they say this. They say that attitude is everything. Anybody ever heard that? Anybody believe that? I happen to totally believe it. I do believe that attitude is everything. But it's easy for us to get distracted when it comes to our attitude, especially if we're trying to have a good attitude. We try to have a good attitude, and then the unplanned, the unexpected happens. And the next thing you know, our good attitude has turned to a bad attitude, or it is just distracting us from everything around us. It's like no matter what we do, that thing is just kind of hanging out there. But here's a question, and I asked this question this week, and I want to bring it back this week, and it's this. If attitude is everything, then why don't we work harder, make it more of a priority to not get distracted when it comes to our attitude? If and most of us raised our hand in agreement and said, yeah, we agree that attitude is everything. And so we know that a good attitude is everything. I mean, it impacts our whole day. But so does a bad attitude, right? It affects everything. It affects our day, it affects our mood, it affects our relationships with others around us. I mean, it just controls everything. And so if attitude is everything, why don't we work harder to control it? To not get distracted so easy. Well, today, we're going to look at the first of 6 different areas that we often find ourselves distracted in when it comes to life. And if we're not careful, these distractions can come at a very high cost. They can rob us of joy. They can ruin relationships. They can just cause us just to have horrible days, even though great things are happening around us, but we miss them because we're so preoccupied, we're so distracted by this thing that we're thinking about. Have you ever thought, though, about how many decisions that you make? So we've got this attitude thing, but then in the course of a day, have you ever thought about how many decisions that you're actually faced with? How many decisions you actually make? Here's a set of numbers we'll throw up on the screen. See, 25. How many think it's more than 25? More than 50? More than 100? Anybody think it's more than 500? Anybody think it's more than 5,000? I mean, 5,000 is a lot of decisions to make in a day, right? Well, you actually know how many decisions you make on an average day? Here it is, 35,000 decisions. It's crazy to think about, isn't it? Right now you're thinking, why do I worry about that? Why am I making so many decisions? All right. Now, when it comes to decisions, some of them are decisions that we almost don't even think about. But if you really stop and think about it, it's like, yeah, I do make a lot of decisions every day. Some of them I'll say that some of them are minor, like, what to wear today. Let me just tell you, there's one decision that I often have to make. I get asked to make anyway, that I just hate. Guys, I got a feeling you're going to relate to this. It's evening. It's dinner time. And the question is, what do you want for dinner? Well, since we haven't started dinner, honey, why don't we go out and get something to eat? What's the question? Where do you want to go? Well, I don't care. Where do you want to go? I don't know. You pick. I always pick. You pick. Anybody, guys, can you relate to this? And then here. How about we go to, I don't know, Chick-fil-A? Oh, I don't want to go to Chick-fil-A. So you know where you don't want to go, but you just don't know where you do want to go. And so, anyway, that's one decision just drives me nuts. And my wife knows that as I glance over at her way. But anyway, so some of the decisions, some of those 35 decisions are like, they're minor, like whether or not to have fried eggs or scrambled eggs for breakfast, whether or not to have toast or a muffin, whether or not I'm going to put fruit in my yogurt today or not, just, which pants, shirt to wear, to shower or not to shower. Am I the only one who questions that every once in a while? Anybody ever go through a day without a shower besides me? Today I did shower this morning, just so you know that, all right? How about to shave or not to shave? We all wrestle with that one. All right, so some of them are just minor, but some of the decisions that we make, let's be honest, are very weighty. Should you apply for that new position or that new job? Should you have that conversation with your boss that you've been putting off for a while? Should you take the next step in your relationship? Some of these are weighty. Some of these are big decisions that you have to make. Should you have those hard conversations with your kids? Should you ask some of the hard questions that you've been putting off? Again, listen, dealing with all these choices can leave you feeling exhausted. I mean, when I put the 35,000 up there, didn't it just kind of make you go, oh? You felt that all of a sudden. It's like, yeah, at the end of the day, there's a lot of decisions that get made. And so they can leave us feeling exhausted, sometimes afraid, anxious, uncertain, confused, angry, worried, and a host of other emotions that we go through. But based on sheer volume, all these decisions can leave us feeling incredibly distracted. Because instead of doing what we maybe want to do, we're having to make these decisions in our lives that are keeping us from doing, and so they become distractions, and they distract us from doing what we really want to do. Your decisions are not the only thing that's influencing your attitude, but they definitely contribute to how you spend most of your time, how you focus your attention, and how you pursue various activities. Your decisions are also often influenced by the assumptions that you make. Now, there are a lot of assumptions that we make. Somebody wrote a book and they described the stories that we tell ourselves. We don't have we're not sure what the real truth is, the full story is, so we make up a story. And along with that story comes all of these assumptions that we begin to make. And, we begin to tell ourselves these things, and before you know it, those things have become a distraction as well. It's been said that decisions shape who you are. Decisions shape who you are. But what if, instead of decisions shaping who we are, what if who you are shaped the decisions that you made? What if your identity, your purpose, your faith, your relationship with God guided the way that you prioritize the decisions that you make? I'm reading a book, and I tried to read it faster, but I'm enjoying it this time more than the first time I read it several years ago. 7 Habits of the Highly Effective People. Anybody ever read that book? A lot of people have. It's a very popular book, bestseller, one of the best sellers of all times. I'm several habits into it, but the third habit is this habit of putting first things first. And I thought it was very interesting as I was working on this message and thinking about that, because what happens is instead of putting and prioritizing the things in our lives and working on those, what happens is we get distracted and start working on second and third kind of layer stuff that really doesn't matter, but it keeps us from doing what we really want to do. And so as I rethought this principle, this habit, it was very interesting in light of what I want to share with you today. If you want to be undistracted in your attitude, it's time that we take a moment and take an honest look at what we're really thinking about. What is it that's rolling around in your head? And again, it might be in the forefront, it might be just, you can't do anything else, but at the same time, you're trying to do other things, but there's this thing kind of on the backside of your mind that's just always there, and regardless of where it is, it's affecting. And so it's time for us to pay attention to what's consuming our time and our attention. So often what consumes us is past things that have happened to us in the past, maybe hurts, somebody hurt us, and we're just, we're not letting go of it. For me, it was, in some ways minor, but, this guy lied and said that I was the one that crossed the line, and for me, that bugged me. My integrity then was called in, and I didn't like that, or injustices. Things happen, maybe not to you, but you see all the things that are going on in the world, and there's a lot going on in the world today that if we're not careful, that we can become very distracted by. Maybe relationships Maybe there's some relationship that you're in, and maybe it's a family relationship. Maybe it's even closer than that, but there's something going on there, and it's just distracting you. What about mistakes that you've made in the past? They happened a long time ago, but you've been unable to forgive yourself or maybe to forgive others, and you're just holding on to these things. And it's been years, and you're still holding on to them. Well, things in the past aren't the only thing that has a tendency to distract us. What about things like bills and repairs? Maybe there's something at home, maybe the car, maybe there's something that you just, it's like, I don't know how I'm going to afford to fix this. This is the worst time in the world for the hot water heater to go out. Whatever it is, maybe it's some kind of illness that you've come down with. Maybe it's opportunities. Maybe the new year has brought new opportunities, but those new opportunities are distracting you because you've got all these things and you're just not sure what to do. So all that to say, there are a lot of things that can distract us and get us off of where we really want to be. Paul says, the Apostle Paul says that there is a way to deal with these things. There's a way really to not let these kind of things become the distractions that they are. He's not going to say that these things, don't have to happen. That they're going to happen. But they don't have to control our attitude. They don't have to control our thoughts all the time and become the distraction that we are. Paul experienced pretty much everything that we've ever experienced. This list behind me. Paul had experienced all of these same things. He knew what it was. But as we read Paul's story, we see that while he experienced all of this and even more beatings, and he was thrown in prison for being a good guy. I mean, just a lot of crazy stuff. But he never allowed those things to distract him from his purpose. He never allowed those things to get in his head and mess with his attitude. I want you to look at something that he wrote. We're going to look at a couple things here real quick that he wrote. And these weren't just words that Paul penned and wrote to somebody. These were words that Paul lived by. So here's what he says in Philippians chapter 4, starting in verse 11. He says this, I have learned, everybody say learned? I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. How many of you struggle to be content? I do. Anybody else? Do you realize at the end of the day that that's what causes a lot of our distractions? Think about that. I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. He says, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. Now notice what he says. There are two things that affect our attitude, the negative things, the bad things that happen to us, but also we can get distracted by the good things that happen to us. Paul says, I know what it's like to not need anything, to have everything that I want, for life just to be great, but I also know what it's like to wonder where my next meal's coming from. And literally there were times that was the case for Paul. He goes on, he says this, I have learned the secret. Everybody say the secret. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. So Paul says he's learned a secret. How many of you would like to know what his secret is? I want to know too. And the good news is he tells us. But before I reveal it to you, you got to help me out with something. All right, this is a big deal. We're about to learn the secret. All right, now, drum roll, everybody. You ready for this? Here's what he says, verse 13. Here's the secret. I can do all this through him, through Christ, who gives me strength. Paul says, here's the secret. And for some of us, you're disappointed because, I thought it was going to be something more than that. But when you understand this, and we look a little bit deeper into this, he says, the secret to being content, the secret to not being distracted is that I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. So we're going to see, based on what Paul says, there are two benefits of an undistracted mind. The first one is contentment. Contentment. The second one is peace. We'll call it peace of mind. A little before he writes this, just a few verses up from this, here's what Paul wrote. Verse 6 of Philippians, he says, do not be anxious. Everybody say anxious. Do not be anxious about anything. The truth of the matter is we're probably anxious about almost everything. And the world that we live on, if you watch the news, if you keep up with some of the stuff that's going on social media, guys, I don't know about you, I have to limit myself because I find myself getting very anxious when I watch some of that. Do not be anxious about anything. I wrote in my notes, we're often anxious about everything all the time. And anxious is what happens when we get distracted. Think about it. When my mind is on all the bad stuff, all the crazy stuff that's going on out there, I'm not focusing on God. I'm distracted, and it's causing me to feel anxious. So he says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition. So prayer just means have a conversation with God, and not just a conversation with God. Hey, God, how's it going today? Get real. The petition part is about getting real with God. What is it that you're anxious about? What is that thing that you're thinking about that you just can't get out of your head? Have you talked to God about it? Have you been honest with him? Tell him exactly how you feel. Don't worry about whether or not you're right or wrong or any of that, but just take it to God. He says, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving. What does the thanksgiving part is? Because I know that I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. So if I'm taking this to God, and petition is, I'm petitioning God for some relief, for some help in this situation, and then I'm going to give him thanks because, as we're going to see, the promise is that he's going to give me what I need, the strength to get through this. He says, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. Verse 7, and the what? The peace. Everybody say peace. First benefit of being undistracted is contentment. The second one is peace. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding. Guys, I share this with people a lot. There's something about when we get real with God and we take our stuff to God and we turn it over to God and we begin to give him thanks for the outcome, even though we don't know how the outcome's what it's going to look like. There's this peace that begins to fill our hearts and minds that just doesn't make sense outside of what Scripture says and the promises that God makes to us. There's a peace that he promises. He says, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts. Let's go back to the first verse that we looked at. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Now, if I'm taking all that stuff that's preoccupying me and I'm giving it to God, then God promises peace that's going to guard my heart, my thoughts, and he says, and your minds, your attitude, in Christ Jesus. So this is the promise that God makes to us, and Paul reveals to us really the secret here of how we remain undistracted, how we don't become anxious and we let those things get us off track. And I put it so an undistracted attitude equals contentment and peace. In other words, an undistracted attitude is one that is content and is at peace. If you're undistracted right now, I guarantee you there's a level of contentment in your life. There's a level of peace. If you are distracted right now, there's an absence of one or both of those things to some degree in your heart and mind right now. Like Paul, we can experience both regardless of what's happening to us. And now, I know that you know this. For most of you, we've shared this information. We've talked about this together over the years on numerous occasions. We know this, but sometimes we just need to be reminded of it, don't we? Because we get what? We get distracted and we forget what is really available to us. Now, there's one last verse that I want to share to you, and really for me, this is the big idea. This is, if there was a take-home today for you of how you're going to work at not allowing yourself to be distracted, it's going to be this. Again, it's something else that Paul wrote. It's found in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, and I'm going to break it down in sections like I've been doing these other couple verses, but I want you to look at what it says. 1 Corinthians 10:13 starts off this way. He says, every test that you have experienced is the kind that normally comes to people. Every test that you have experienced is the kind that normally comes to people. Ever feel like what you're going through nobody else can relate to? I've been there. Anybody else? Something happens to you and somebody says, I get it, I understand. And what is our first response? No, you don't. You have no idea what I'm going through. Okay, and maybe that person doesn't, but somebody does. Here's what this says. Every unplanned and unexpected experience is a common experience to mankind. You know, the window, when my mirror got smacked and shattered and blew all to pieces, it was amazing at how many other trucks especially, I began to see the same mirror on their truck had no mirror in it. And I thought, man, I'm not the only one that's ever happened to. But that's true no matter what it is, whatever has happened in your life. It's a common experience. It's not unique to you. That's what the scriptures are promised. Now, let that sink in just for a moment. What happens to you, you're not the first to experience it. It won't be the first time, and you won't be the last one to experience it. Now, that would be bad news for most of us, because where's the comfort in that? Okay, so somebody else has experienced the same thing, sucks for them because I know how much it sucks for me, right? All right, now it would be bad news except for what Paul says next. His next statement, but God keeps his promises. Everybody say promises? But God keeps his promises. Anybody know somebody that you just cannot depend on because no matter what they promise you, they will not come through? Some of you are mad at me. I just realized this. Some of you are mad at me this morning because last week I kind of made a promise that something would return here at the Mechanicsville campus, and they're not there. Anybody know what it is? Donuts. Wow, dude. Holy cow. Man. So anyway, they went to pick up the donuts, and the place was closed. That's all I can tell you, all right? So I didn't keep my promise, but God keeps his promise, all right? So let's stay focused here on what matters. This is about God, not about me. But God keeps his promise. How does that make you feel? Just that statement, God keeps his promise. In light of the couple verses we've looked at already, God keeps his promises. Contentment, peace, if I'll just trust him, if I'll just give it to him. But God keeps his promises. Look what he continues. He says he will not allow you to be tested beyond your power to remain firm. Ever feel like God has more confidence in you than you have in yourself? Yeah, we all have, don't we? But God keeps his promise. He will not allow you to be tested beyond your power to remain firm. He continues, at the time that you are put to the test, he will give you the strength. Everybody say strength. He will give you the strength to endure it and so provide you with a way out. Everybody say way out. Two promises in that verse. Strength to endure it. Strength that is not your strength. Strength that is his strength. I can do all things through Christ who what? Strengthens me. All right? And the second promise is that he's going to provide a way out. What you're going through, you don't have to remain there. Now, at the end of the day, nothing changed with my mirror. I still had to fix it. I'm the one who, I'm still out $500, but I could either stay there or I could get out of that. I chose mentally to get out of there. Well, almost. I'm still a little ticked at the guy, but you get my point, right? Sometimes it's just the situation doesn't change, but our attitude can change. And sometimes that is the way out of what we find ourselves in. There are so many promises from God to help us, to deliver us, promises of his constant presence with us. And sometimes, again, we just need to be reminded of that. On our trip this past summer to Arizona, after the unplanned and unexpected happened, and I'd shared some of this with you guys. You guys know we went to visit my son and daughter out in Arizona, and while we were there, Lynette and I both got COVID. It cut short our trip. We struggled. We left there a couple days early. Heading back, we drove out, having to drive back, so we were coming up to Colorado. We ended up taking 2 days to get there instead of the 1 day that we planned. By the time we got there, we were wore out. We were just exhausted from fighting the fatigue and all of that. And And we were sitting at this KOA campground. It was literally at the foothills of Pikes Peak. And one of the things on our list to do was we were going to go to the top of Pikes Peak. But then we found out it was about an hour and a half drive with traffic to get to the very top. And we were both like, I don't think I could spend another hour and a half in a car. We just need to chill, need to relax. And so we chose not to do that. We'd gone to the camp store there, and as we walked into the camp store, they had these little wooden signs. You've probably seen them. Here's a picture of them. You've probably seen these little things. They got these funny, cute little sayings on them, and you don't have to read all of those because some of them may not be, I don't know. But how many of you seen these little wooden signs? Well, in this camp store, we were reading them, laughing at some of them, but there was one that stuck out to us, but we didn't buy it that night. We went back to the campgrounds, and it was amazing. We kept saying the statement. It was like, that was on that sign. Let's go back and get it. And so we went back and bought it, and we put it on the dashboard of our truck. Here's what it looks like. And it says this: it is what it is. And so that reminded us, and it was amazing how many times from that point on we said that, and it began to shift and change our attitude. It reminded us that while we couldn't control what happened to us, we could control our attitude. And again, up to that point, I guess I got an attitude problem because I had an attitude I was mad. I was mad with God. Lynette will tell you that our trip got cut short with our kids and just the whole thing. But God used this crazy sign to kind of turn things around. And so this became my quote: it is what it is. In other words, I can't control what's happening. I can't control circumstances and situations, but I do have control over my thoughts, which then means I have control over my attitude. And so I didn't have to let the things that were happening to me distract me and give me a bad attitude. And so this has become my quote. It was my quote for the rest of last year, and this thing is still sitting on my truck, and it reminds me, it was funny, God used it back during the whole mirror deal. Every time I would get in my truck and see my mirror broke on this side, my attitude would begin to change, and it was like right back there. And I'd see this sign on my truck, and it is what it is. Okay, God, I'm not the only one. It's just a mirror. It can be replaced. Let it go, blah, blah. And I'd let it go, and eventually I got a new mirror, and I don't even have to think about it anymore. But I want this to become your saying for this year, because it's important that we understand that sometimes it just is what it is, and there's nothing you can do about it other than control your thoughts, control your attitude. So I want you to say this phrase with me: it is what it is. One more time. Doesn't it feel good just to say that? It's like you're almost releasing it. So if you're thinking, think about whatever it is that you're thinking about right now. If you say that, you can just let it go. It's almost like you are letting it go when you say that. Say it with me. It is what it is. Now, I want to combine that today with this verse in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13 that we just looked at. So when you came in, you got a little card that looks like this. On one side of it, it says, it is what it is. And on the other side, it says 1 Corinthians 10:13. So I want to blend it is what it is with 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. All right, and so if we were to do that, if we were to take basically, what this verse reminds us of, what this verse tells us, and we were to put it this way: it is what it is. A test not unlike any other. Sometimes we just need to start there. Hey, I'm not the first one to go through this. Other people have been through this. Other people have been through worse, and guess what? They came through it. And if they can get through it, I can get through it. So just to remind ourselves, whatever it is that you're facing, it's a test not unlike any others. It's not unique to you. You're not the first. You won't be the last. All right? It is what it is, a test not like any other. Second, it is what it is, an opportunity for God to keep his what? Promise. Think about that. The situation that you find yourself in right now is an opportunity for God to keep his promise. Third, it is what it is, an opportunity to stand firm in my faith. See, faith says, I'm going to believe and trust God. I'm going to hold God accountable to keep his promises for me. But if I take control and I let it distract me and I get a bad attitude, I'm not standing firm in my faith. I'm standing firm in myself and in the situation and the attitude that I've got. So it is what it is, an opportunity to stand firm in my faith. And last, it is what it is, and with God's help, I've got this. Because he promised strength and a way out. And if I can give it to him, that's what I'll experience. It is what it is. Now, I hope that you'll put that somewhere this year, and that statement will become your statement. And every time you find yourselves getting distracted, especially when it comes to your attitude, you can say, very good. It is what it is. All right. Now, to bring this home, there are 3 questions that I want you to think about. As the band comes on the stage, they're going to lead us here in a song, and we're going to celebrate baptism in just a moment. But 3 questions I want you to think about and work through even before you leave here today. And so while the band's singing this next song, you can think about this. So the first question is this. What is something that you consider to be a big distraction in your life right now? Now, I've already kind of asked that in a different way. What are you thinking about? What's going on in your head? But maybe that's not it. Maybe there's something else that's an even bigger distraction than that. So think about that. Number 2, how do you normally respond to the unplanned and unexpected? How do you normally respond? I hope it's not like me, but if you're like me, I pretty much know what your first response is. And sometimes we got to work through it, and sometimes we got to be reminded. But think about, when something happens, is your first response to trust God and just say, it is what it is. God's got this. I've got this. I'm going to get through it. Or do we get distracted, get mad? So think about how you respond. And then the last question is, who or what controls your attitude? Think about this. Who or what controls your attitude? Because the answer to that question, the right answer to that question, will lead you to an undistracted attitude every single time. And it will lead to contentment and peace and strength and a way out of every situation that you find. So would you just take a few moments as we listen to this song and think about what's distracting you and what's controlling your attitude.
Well, thanks so much again for stopping by. If you have any questions or would like to get connected here at Atlee Church, we would love to help or serve you any way that we can. And if God is doing something awesome in your life, we'd love to hear about it. You can email us directly at stories@atleechurch.org. And if you would like to support the ministries here at Atlee financially, you can go to our website and click the top tab, Give, and that helps us continue to get these messages out there and make a difference in the lives of so many. Well, thanks for tuning in, and we hope to see you again next week.